Let's talk about foreign policy, other topics with Adam Smith, Democratic Congressman from Washington State, Chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, and Florida Republican Congressman Mike Waltz, also on the House Armed Services Committee. Gentlemen, thanks for the time. I like to start these bipartisan interviews for some common ground and what you two agree on. You can choose your topic. Congressman Smith, first to you.
Well, I think Ukraine. Congressman Waltz and I went on a bipartisan codel to Kyiv about a month ago, met with President Zelensky, and got a tour of sort of the Battle of Kyiv and what the Ukrainians are doing to resist the Russian impasse. And we're very united on giving Ukraine all the support they can possibly get to fight off the Russians. And I think President Zelensky is right. This war doesn't stop until Putin is stopped and pushed back. And we agree on getting all the help we can to Ukraine to do that.
You know, I want to play a soundbite, Congressman Waltz, before I get to you on that. And it's about Ukraine from the Defense Department today, about the effort to get military equipment in there and what's happening.
We're trying to be very deliberate about what systems we think makes the most sense for Ukraine to have. So these also have to be systems that Ukraine itself can sustain. But I can tell you that fighter aircraft remain on the table. Just no final decisions have been made about that.
Fighter aircraft going in. It seems like there's just a ton of money, obviously, pouring in for this equipment. There's also, and I've talked to you before about this, is there a mission creep here from the U.S. perspective inside Ukraine?
Well, Brett, I think another thing that you see agreement on the Hill is that, first, Ukraine should have had much of this equipment in the first place, and that the administration seems to constantly be behind in terms of what they're providing versus what Ukraine needs, from Harpoon anti-ship missiles to the Stingers they didn't get till after the invasion, despite asking for them beforehand, to the fighter aircraft, and eventually to the long-range missile artillery, the HIMARS. We finally eventually get it to them, but I think at the end of the day, they are losing slowly. Zelensky is convinced that if he gets cut off from the Black Sea, he's no longer viable as a country. And at the end of the day, Brett, he has to go on the offensive to regain momentum, or once again, Russia will grind away. If the lines solidify like they are by wintertime, there's a real fear that Russia will just annex everything they have, lick their wounds, and be right back at it just a few years down the road. So it's pay now or pay later. I think the other thing, Brett, is that the Europeans absolutely have to step up and do more, particularly Germany. They have provided a fraction of what the United States have, yet they are most directly at threat. And Zelensky's other fear is that once we get into winter, if Russia can take the Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant offline, that's 30% of Ukraine's electricity, then they can dial back the gas to both Ukraine and Germany. You're going to see a lot more European backsliding. So time is of the essence right now.
Chairman Smith, I want to ask about another foreign policy issue, and that is Iran. The administration...
Well, I do want to comment.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, just look, we have gotten a ton of aid to Ukraine, and I don't agree that Ukraine right now is losing slowly, particularly in the last 6 weeks. The HIMARS systems that we've got in, the Gemler's weapon systems, the 155 millimeter cannons and weapons, Ukraine is actually beginning to push back. We've seen the strikes within Crimea and within occupied, the other parts of Ukraine that are occupied by Russia. I think Ukraine right now is setting up pretty well for the counteroffensive that Mike talked about. So we are getting them a lot of support. And I guess I'm a little more optimistic at this point, a month after our visit, about Ukraine's ability to push this fight to the Russians in the next 3 months.
Okay, I want to talk to you about another topic, and that is Iran. Chairman Smith, just moments ago, senior defense officials confirming reports from the region that the U.S. military fired upon 2 sites in Syria after receiving gunfire from those sites. This is after we saw this direct tie to Iran and the drone that was used to attack U.S. troops and others on the ground in Syria. Meantime, the negotiations continue with Iran on the nuclear deal. What about that from your perspective?
Well, two things. One, I think it's very appropriate that we push back against the Iranians anytime they attempt to or attack our troops, and that's what the response from the Pentagon and from the president was just in the last 24 hours to respond to the drone attack. Iran is very active in Syria, as we all know. They're active, working through Syria to supply arms to Hezbollah and Hamas to put pressure on Israel. It is a very complicated fight, but I think it is very appropriate that we push back against Iran. On the Iran nuclear deal, I certainly understand that Iran is a malign actor in the region, without question. But since we've withdrawn from the Iran nuclear deal, in addition to continuing to be a very malign actor in the region, they've started enriching uranium at a higher level, and they're closer to a bomb now than they've ever been. So if there is some agreement that can get them further away from a bomb, then I'm kind of at a loss for why so many people are opposed to it. Yeah, we'd love to stop Iran from messing around in all these other countries, but they're doing that, whether they're building a bomb or not. So we need to focus on both those issues.
Well, I start with common ground. I'm probably going to end with a little dispute, I'm sure. Congressman Waltz, Iran has obviously been implicated in trying to assassinate former U.S. officials, and there are malign actors around the region, as Chairman Smith mentions. What about this deal?
Yeah, you're right, Brett. This is where we do disagree. I think the last thing we should be doing right now is the Iranians are targeting American officials, have been implicated in assassinations, are right now, as we speak, holding American citizens hostage in Evin prison in Tehran, and now attacking the U.S. military in Syria through their proxies. The last thing we should be doing is releasing billions in sanction relief right into the IRGC, also likely lifting secondary sanctions on the IRGC as a workaround from not dropping them from the terrorism list so that they can further finance their malign activity. It's the last thing we should be doing, but Iran is pushing right now because they know they can get away with it. They know this administration's desperate for any kind of deal. And by the way, it's the Russians that we're using as the intermediary, and if the reporting is correct, it'll be the Russians who determine if we're all in compliance to then release the uranium if they decide a future administration isn't in compliance. So I think for all of those reasons, we have to go back to the maximum pressure campaign and bargain from a position of strength rather than the current position of weakness.
All right, let me.
The maximum pressure campaign has pushed Iran to being as close to having a nuclear bomb as they've ever been. I mean, I just don't see why letting Iran get a nuclear bomb puts us in a better position in dealing with Iran. As far as the details, there's no evidence yet that the Russians are going to be. We don't know the details of it, but to cut it off and say we shouldn't even talk about it as Iran dances towards developing a nuclear weapon, we should at least try to stop that. All I'm saying.
Well,
Last
Brett,
word.
I would
Got
say
10
that
seconds.
the reason that they're close to having a bomb is because they absolutely violated the deal as exposed by Israeli intelligence with their trove of intelligence in 2018. And that's why we absolutely walked away from it, because they weren't going to uphold their end of it. I don't trust them as far as I can throw them.
All right, we're going to follow all elements of this. We enjoy these bipartisan discussions. We started on common ground, at least. Gentlemen, thanks for the